Welcome everyone. We might start off. There's a few people still joining us, but we'll kick off because we've got I've done it already. We've got a lot to get through today. So thanks for joining us. For those who don't know me, my name is Gai Le Roy, and I'm lucky enough to be the CEO of the IAB. So this is the 17th IAB webinar, and this week we're talking about sport. We've got a great lineup of guests to go through, and I have even, if you can see it, put on a sporting related top. Unfortunately, I didn't have an AFL or cricket top, but I ventured in for the good of the industry into my 18-year-old son's bedroom and pulled out a Sydney FC shirt. So the measures I go to for the industry. So today we're joined by a raft of characters and industry experts. We're going to hear from, go to the next slide, Scott Gillham from Nielsen's got some really exciting brand new research that you're going to get the first glance of here, looking at the new normal for fan engagement. Then we're going to be followed by Angus King from Twitter, who's going to go through sports community and a little bit of a glimpse into the future of sports. Then we're joined by Sarah Wyse, good friend of the IAB, digital media, moved into a sporting role, but still very much engaged in the digital side of things, who's going to go through, and her presentation's called Sportstainment, which I'm not sure if I approve of that word, but we'll hear from her about how the AFL's been, I guess, coping during this period, engaging with fans, etc. We're going to hear from Paddy Whitnall from Publicis, talking about media investment and how the sponsorship side of things is, not just currently, but how it's been evolving over time. And then last but not least, we're going to have the second Patrick for the lineup today. So Patrick Horan, who's the head of digital for Cricket Australia, and again going to talk us through and stages of COVID. Probably sounds a little bit bleak, but a little bit around how content's evolved, engagement with fans. The interesting thing pulling together this webinar for me was it was quite similar to a lot of the other messages that have been coming through other podcasts and other research we've done during this period. So we've had a lot of discussions in different verticals around brands keeping active, keeping communicating, and I guess sports has got that extra layer of particularly passionate, but also demanding fans, audience, engagement base, and I guess scrutiny as well. So it will be very interesting to hear from everyone. So at the end of, everyone's going to do a brief presentation, and then we're going to come back for a panel. So please throw in some questions into the Q&A box. We'll try and get through as many as we can. If we don't get to all of them, we'll try and answer them afterwards. This recording and the presentations will be available afterwards, so we'll post that up early next week, so you will have access to all this information. Tiffany from our office will also be sharing any resources that are referenced, that there might be more details as well, so you can visit those as well. So we're going to get going. I'm going to first hand over to Scott, who's going to take us through his brand new research.
Thanks, Gai, and morning everyone, and a special shout out to all our friends that are on this session or have joined the call from Melbourne and Victoria. So firstly, this morning, I'm just going to share with you some recent research that we conducted around sports fans and their engagement or attitudes and behaviours sort of during COVID, and what they look like in a post-COVID world, or when we can, I think, return back to sport en masse as we were doing previously. Just to give you a little bit of background context, it was a nationally representative survey across 1,500 respondents aged 18 plus, and a sports fan is defined as anyone who had attended a live game in the past 12 months, or watched a broadcast on TV, or streamed a match online, or had consumed some form of sports content over the most recent 12 months. Okay, if we could just click through to the next slide, please. So firstly, just wanted to highlight the one thing that came through is that we have a very passionate, avid fan base when it comes to sport. Of those that we surveyed, more than 2 in 3 had at least attended one sports match at least once a year. and with nearly 1 in 3 attending at least on a monthly basis. And when we look at those sports to the right-hand side there in terms of had been attended, AFL was ranked number 1, followed by cricket, rugby league, tennis, and soccer, rounding out the top 5. Okay, if we could just click through to the next slide, please. We then wanted to understand what they had been doing whilst there'd been no live sport on. So thinking about those early stages of COVID when no live sport was being played at all. Certainly what came through is 44% had missed being able to go to a live game or a match. And then when we started to understand what they'd been doing in terms of replacement activity. So number 1 or most popular was watching TV, documentaries, movies. So if you think of, binge watching Netflix and Stan, that certainly came through. That was followed by cooking. So of those that we surveyed, cooking was right up there in terms of what they've been doing from a replacement activity. And I think if you think back to those early stages of COVID when there was no live sport on, MasterChef had just launched. So there was a bit of a ripple effect flowing through. The other thing that was called out was just active recreation. So walking, cycling. I can certainly speak from my own sort of personal experience during those early stages. I think I saw more people walking the streets of my local area than I ever have, followed by gardening and then spending time with family and family activities. If we just click through to the next slide. We then wanted to find out whether those replacement activities were sort of here to stay and would they continue once they were able to attend live sport again. And for the majority, so two in every 3, they certainly plan to continue with these newfound replacement activities as well as attending live sport. A little over 1 in 10 will actually just return back to live sport and not spend any time on their replacement activities. But we also found that there was a segment that were not planning to return to live sport in the short term and actually focus on their replacement activities, their new replacement activities. And when we drilled down a little bit into this segment, what came through that there was a definite skew to the younger cohort. So those under 35 were typically coming through in this, coming through in the data is not necessarily returning to live sport immediately in the short term. But on a positive note, what we found is there was certainly 1 in 5 are going to be making up for lost time and will actually be attending live sport more than ever. You just click through to the next slide. We then wanted to find out what, in the new world, and when we think of COVID, what their expectations and experiences would be moving forward once they could attend live sport. And what came through certainly was that hygiene and safety factors are now going to be critical. If you look across the 4 sort of key drivers, prominent signage around hygiene. Sorry.
Where am I? Sorry, Scott.
That's okay. That's good. Was certainly the number 1 thing that everyone would now consider as sort of paramount. Seating plans, so where they're seating, quick and easy access to food, which probably goes for any game or match. Also things like staggered arrival times and departure times, as well as when we looked at it, some of the more strident measures. So things such as temperature testing to be conducted on arrival. They'll only attend if staff are wearing masks and gloves, even to the point where they'll only attend now if there's a vaccine. What came through is that the older demographics, sort of 60 plus, they were really only concerned around sort of those first couple of drivers around signage and hygiene reminders, whereas the younger cohort, under 35s, were really focused more on some of those more strident measures, such as temperature testing, wearing face masks and gloves, and even to that point with a vaccine. So I guess one of the things to leave you with is it's not necessarily going to be as simple as just opening up the gates again and everyone will come flooding back. There's certainly a whole new consideration set that needs to be factored in once we can start to return back to live sport. We just click through to the next slide, please. Then just to, I guess, put some context around more broader sports consumption. So this is looking at people consuming sport, not only going to live games, but also watching it on TV, streaming it online, or consuming some kind of sports content. And sort of a similar pattern and theme emerged in terms of when we asked respondents around that, were they going to continue their replacement activities? More than 2 in 3 say they intend to not only consume live sport, but also spend time on their new replacement activities that they've discovered over this time frame since COVID. Again, we also found that there was a section of audience that in the short term are probably more likely to focus on their replacement activities as opposed to consuming live sport. And again, when we drill down into that audience, we did find that was certainly skewing younger to the younger cohort around the sort of under 35 age group. And again, at the same time, we also found that there was a section that are certainly going to be making up for lost time. So 16% will actually be consuming more sport than ever. We just click through the next slide. And what I wanted to just highlight here was just, I guess, what some of the opportunities are and what some key drivers might be to drive engagement amongst some of that younger cohort. So what sort of came through was that younger age group are open to sort of more shorter matches or different format changes. They also expressed a preference for watching highlights. But I think what also was interesting is that when you think back to those early stages back in April, when there was no live sport being played, we certainly saw a lot of archival footage and replays of classic matches and so on, which were broadcast both on TV and shared on social platforms. That actually seemed to resonate with the younger audience more so than the older demographic who had probably already seen a lot of those matches before. Certainly the alternate sort of sports content that we also saw being produced, with behind the scenes footage and some of the documentaries and so forth, again, all seem to resonate more with the younger audience. So Gai, if we just click through the next slide. So just to sort of wrap up in a couple of key takeaways. So like on a positive note, more than 1 in 5 attendees are going to be making up for lost time and attending live sport more frequently. Certainly it does appear there has been a change in the short term with 69% or more than 2 in 3 sports fans saying they're going to continue spending time on their replacement activities as well as consume live sport. It's coming through that younger cohort are more likely to spend time on replacement activities than consume sport in the short term. But on the flip side to that, I think there was we've seen some key opportunities and drivers around engagement with some of those alternate content types, shorter formats, those replays of classic matches, behind the scenes footage and so forth. And then the final piece is just really around, I guess, the new normal from a hygiene and safety perspective, and that fans now will be expecting that as part of their return to live sport. So that was it. That was just a quick wrap up. This is part of a much larger 50-page report that we conducted, which is available if anyone's interested. I might just now pass over to Angus. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. And thanks everyone for joining us. If you can go back one slide, Gai. So 2020 has really given us, I think, a glimpse into the future of sports. And, I think we would all agree that that future is digital. So today I wanted to run through 3 things with you. Firstly, I wanted to run through what we're seeing around fans and their experiences on platforms like Twitter. Secondly, what we're doing with publishers during COVID, and also what we've seen from brands. If you can go to the next slide, Gai. So fundamentally, we believe that Twitter enhances the fan experience. At its core, it's really just about people connecting. It's about sports fans coming together and connecting and having that enhanced experience. Gai, if you want to just flick to the next slide, please. We did some research as well during COVID, and we found a number of things. Firstly, we have an incredibly engaged and leaned in sports fan. But a couple of highlights here is firstly that 50% of fans agreed that it's more fun being on Twitter during a game. So really it's about connecting with each other. It's about connecting with sports fans. But at the base of that, at the core of that is just having more fun. And also 3 and 5 found that they can be more involved on Twitter. And so I think, the takeout from this research is how can brands, publishers, leagues, rights holders create experiences that are more fun and experiences that can get people more engaged in digital environments. If you want to flick to the next slide, Gai. So we've done we've seen a number of things from broadcasters, leagues, sports right holders during COVID. A number of these include archival footage, as Scott mentioned. We've also seen watch parties. So that is when we bring together fans or celebrities or often sports stars and create a community on Twitter where they can have a conversation aligned to a particular viewing party of an event or a game. I wanted to just highlight this example of something that we did with the Football Federation of Australia. They came to us with an insight firstly, and that goes back to what Scott said. And that insight is that there was all this conversation happening on Twitter around archival moments. So past big sports moments. And there's no bigger sports moment from the Socceroos than the Uruguay versus Socceroos 2005 qualifier. So what I loved about this is that it was insight driven, firstly. Secondly, they ran it across multiple platforms. So they live streamed it across their owned and operated platforms. They had it on Fox Sports. And then really Twitter at the heart was the conversational layer that brought it all together. So it allowed people to relive every single moment. And we were seeing people getting excited about every goal, every tackle, and every moment. And Twitter absolutely lit up on the night. So 15 years later, this game trended across Australia. And then we worked with the FFA to create an events page. So really that's just a page on Twitter that brings together all of the conversation and excitement from fans, and then also puts in all the video content. And we had 2 million views around this experience on the night. If you can flick to the next slide. So additionally, brands are finding new ways to connect with their customers. And there are really 3 insights that we saw during COVID. If you flick to the next slide, Gai. And they are that alignment to short form content. So another one from Scott's research, and that is that more people are looking at different ways to consume sports. And certainly for us, highlights and short snippets of content has been at the heart of what we do best. And as you can see here on the right-hand side, the partnership we've recently done with the AFL brings live clips, and then it gives the opportunity for brands to wrap their message around that. And what we're seeing from brands is also shorter form content, shorter form pre-rolls, and we're working really closely with a lot of them to bring down their 30-second or 15-second assets to 6-second assets. The second insight is we're having more conversations with brands around how they can connect what they're doing with TV and what they're doing with Twitter. A couple of insights that we have is that we know that 60% of sports fans are actually watching Twitter at the same time. 60% of sports fans on Twitter are watching Twitter at the same time. And additionally, we know we can drive incremental reach. So we've run a bunch of studies that show that we can drive anywhere between 6 and 12% incremental reach in Australia, particularly in that light TV viewer audience. And then the last insight is that we work with brands, broadcasters, leagues to create custom experiences to really create an engaged experience for fans. So just to wrap up, we're really excited to work more closely with brands, more closely with leagues and publishers to create those enhanced fan experiences for sports fans. So I'll hand it over to Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks, Angus. I just want to start off by saying that I put this slide in just for Gai, because I knew that she'd love the word sportstainment. I actually put it in as a slight, as a bit of sarcasm, because when I heard this term about a year ago, I just laughed. I just thought it was ridiculous. But it turns out, Gai, it's actually a thing. If you want to get to the next slide, I'll talk to you a bit more about it. So just for everybody who's on this call who might not be super familiar with AFL Media, it's the internal media department at the AFL. There's about 75 of us. We do everything from content creation, from editorial news to social to video production, and we also put the live stream on in our app environment. So for us, after spending probably 4 months really piecing together the content strategy for 2020, about a week out from it being executed, we have to basically rip it up and start again. For those who've been looking at the press, we know that about 70% of staff at the AFL have been stood down during COVID. So a particularly challenging time for all of us in being able to execute our plans, even though they are different, with so many of our staff stood down. So resourcing has been a real challenge for us. But really what we did, we tore up our content strategy and started again. And what we decided to focus on with our resourcing was really two things. One, how do we bring fans closer to the game, especially with the challenge of being there's no live sport on at the moment, or there wasn't at the time. And the second thing was, how do we really connect and support our community? Because ultimately the AFL is a community brand. I think most sporting brands in Australia are. So this is a really interesting piece of content that we pulled together with Hamish McLaughlin called Last Time I Cried. And I'm using this as an example of some of the content we've created specifically to try and bring to the fore some of the challenges that often don't get spoken about in times of vulnerability, especially amongst our male groups of audiences. So this is a great piece of content looking at talking to fans and also big stars of the game, specifically around when was the last time they cried. I've sent the link to Gai for you guys to have a look at it in your lunch break today or afternoon tea. But have a look at it. It's really moving content and it's really opened up conversation amongst some of the kind of, stereotype macho men, if you like, who follow the AFL. So that's been a really great piece of content that a sponsor jumped on board really early on. So that's kind of one of many examples of some of the sports entertainment, which is the proper word for it. Gai, if you can flick to the next slide, please. Like Scott mentioned, and also Angus, the archive was a real surprise to us. We use the archive a lot across our network anyway, mostly from an entertainment point of view when we're looking at, including a piece of content from 25 years ago that we're referencing in, let's say, an interview with a player. But really, what we've learned in this period is that I think in times of a crisis, people reach for nostalgia, and it's that fondness of that nostalgia. So we've definitely seen an audience growth amongst younger audiences, but also amongst our avid fans and more traditional audiences viewing the archive content. We've actually got a room in the AFL office dedicated to storing thousands of tapes, which we're now in the process of digitizing. I wish we'd done that before this period, but we're doing that now, and we've actually had fixture throwbacks, a whole content stream that replaced the live game. So if it was a Collingwood-Richmond game, for example, that was due to be on the fixture, we'd replace that with an iconic Collingwood-Richmond game in the past and ran that amongst highlights and amongst top tens and that kind of thing. So the archive for us has been a really important part of keeping our fans connected in all different shapes and sizes. If we go to the next slide, please. Okay. I've got a minute clip here to show you. Hopefully it kind of works well on the Zoom call. But one thing that we kind of, it didn't take us by surprise. We weren't sure how it was going to go. But I think what's really clear is the tradition holds really strong in this country throughout any period of time. As the footy fans on this call would know, there's a big game on Anzac Day in the AFL calendar, which is arguably for some the best game and the best day in the AFL fixture. Obviously we didn't have that tribute to Anzac Day this year because there were no live games, but instead we created a piece of content in an eerily quiet MCG that kind of got, was able to bring everyone together. We got this piece of content out across lots of different networks. I'm not going to show you the whole clip. I'll send that to you afterwards, but if we can just show the teaser, please, Gai. So, yeah, we can flick. So that was slightly jerky. For those who didn't get sound, that was deliberate. There's no sound, but we'll send you the full clip. But slightly jerkier than if you played it on your own laptops. But a really fantastic display of, I guess, the time that we're in, but also the dedication to celebrating Anzac through the football platform. Thank you for sharing that, Gai and team. So the next part really is around online gaming, and we created a new brand for the AFL Gamers Network during COVID. I put this in here, I guess, because the AFL tried esports probably 4 years ago, and I think directionally it was definitely right. So I think the explosion of esports and online gaming amongst younger demographics, and just the cult and large following that has. I think directionally it was right. Our execution, however, probably wasn't quite right at the time, 3 or 4 years ago. So this is really around us having a bit of a take two moment where we got something up and running and it worked really well. So this is something that our commercial team have done a fantastic job in getting commercial support for. And we think we raised $100,000 for charity in a fortnight competition about 6 weeks ago too, which is awesome. So this is really around us trying to tap into that younger demographics and younger audiences, but also I guess the learning here is just because it didn't work the first time doesn't mean that it wasn't right. And I think, you know, in opportunities like this, having another go at something, I think is really proven to work really well for us. And then Gai, final slide, please. Our kind of final learning really is, because we're all working from home at the moment and because of all the restrictions in place, we've been able to find, I guess, a workforce which looks a bit more like the Australian population. And the reason why I mention this is because when I joined the AFL 18 months ago, we had a very large older male skewed audience, despite knowing that a lot of our real fans, our actual fans, were women and kids and youth. From a media perspective, we never really spoke to them. We weren't really reaching or targeting them in the most effective way. And that was a direct reflection of probably two things. One, the content we were creating was very news, stat, hardcore fan, written in a very sort of masculine sport, what you expect from a sports journalist way. But the second thing is that the team were full of older guys. And so I guess there's no surprise that our audience sort of looked like a reflection of our workforce. And so what we've done it's been a journey over the last 18 months anyway, but certainly during COVID, we've been able to engage lots of different people as part of our content creation across our network. And so these are some of the people who are part of our team and who we use for content creation specifically. And surprise, surprise, if you look at the composition of our audience, it's changed quite a lot from a geographical perspective, from a gender perspective, from an age perspective. And we're kind of, at the moment, we're halfway through a whole piece of work around tribes and different way of segmenting audiences outside of age and gender. But it's been a really great positive step for us that we've been a bit more forced into this space, and the process around becoming more diverse has been expedited from this period of time. So if anyone's kind of on the call who is working in content and is looking at ways of trying to reach new audiences, it's kind of the most simple ways of change. So it's kind of an obvious and basic way of changing your audience composition is changing who makes your content. And that's been a really big learning for us. So I'll end it there because we've only got 5 minutes, but any questions, please send them to Gai. Thank you.
So when it came to media investment, I guess firstly our clients during the initial lockdown and pause of sports they were asking us, is this a force majeure? Was this pandemic an act of God? And essentially getting us to look at, I guess, a clause in sports contracts that has been an inclusion but rarely used. And look, yes, there could have been cause to do that because obviously we're on pause and am I utilising my investment wisely? But of course, sports partnerships for us tend to be around the long term rather than the short term. And look, because it was paused and if you were to take away that investment, potentially you would get a negative fan reaction or perceived lack of support and loyalty to that club, and therefore that could hurt your reputation. So if you didn't want to exit out of that partnership, what it did do was it forced a number of partners to re-evaluate, I suppose, the flexibility in their current contracts and to utilise ways to connect with fans And that channel of choice, I suppose, as has already been demonstrated, was in digital and social. So 3 areas I'll talk to here really around content, activations and emerging sports, all powered by digital. Now, look, dependent on the sports that you've partnered with, be it the AFL, Cricket Australia, NRL, you know, they have it, their access quality and focus on digital would, you know, where they are on their journey, I guess that would, help you decide of how you would move into new avenues. So, because in the past, for some, digital could have been just part of a contract where it's an add-on or an extension into social posts or through to media spend. So for us, it just meant that we had to make sure and understand where each of them are along the journey. So when it came to content, I suppose effectively here, it was around refreshing your investment. And look, clubs and codes with their fans have always been finding ways of connecting with audiences between games. And Sarah talked a lot about that. And I suppose in the lockdown, with the lack of sport on digital and potentially digital partner publishers as well, this pushed it to the limit because people still had that thirst for sport. You know, a lot of us saw the Michael Jordan documentary on Netflix, or the Ashes documentary, or as Sarah talked to, the AFL archives. You know, this is also supported what Scott spoke to earlier around how this was, there was still a thirst for those types of documentaries. But that aside, I suppose what has emerged from this is the reliance on the sports stars themselves, who were also, I guess, on pause or on lockdown themselves to create that content. You couldn't potentially get them out of their homes to film something with them. You had to rely on them. Now, that took a lot of pressure on them both. First of all, do they have a personality? Can they perform on camera? Do they actually understand the technology when someone else is usually setting it up for them? And look, there's been varying results on this, but it certainly showed that the younger generation of sports stars probably were able to adapt to that more so than the established stars. What we also found was that though traditional sports stars have a scale on traditional formats such as TV, it doesn't always translate to digital. The example here being Nadal interviewing Federer on Instagram only really produced about 40,000 viewers. But it does give you a kind of a different way of connecting with the stars than you ever have before. What we found in a digital content environment was that larger audiences tend to require more of an established digital first talent. And that takes time to build in this scale. So as you're migrating traditional sports players into this space, it will take time. With activations, we really had to, I guess, redesign the engagement around here, because this is a big impact on activations, because they tend to be the key way that you can connect and engage with your fans beyond potentially the badging exercises that you may have on shirts or around stadiums. Now, whether you have an activation just at a club, or it is at the scale of something the Australian Open, where there are multiple activations, if there are still restrictions of travel, both internationally and state, and social distancing remains, and of course there are the concerns around hygiene that Scott spoke about, you really have to think about how you even create them. There will potentially be no way of queuing, constant cleaning required. So those are the things that we've always traditionally built activations on. Now, clubs have already started to lead this way, of course. If you look at a number of the soccer games in a number of markets, they've had the fan walls where you could watch in by Zoom, which was a great way of getting people to feel like they're part of the stadium, and for the players too. But I think the pivot now needs to be, how do you engage fans virtually through AR or digital-only experiences? And I think there'll be some amazing creations coming up this year. Lastly, as Sarah spoke about, it's the emerging sports that really saw the increase of focus, certainly around esports and gaming. So for us, this was about, I guess, reimagining your experience, your investment. For us, I guess the lockdown gave this focus, and we saw the F1 move into esports, AFL Gamer Network being created. And for us, this is something that we did for a client of ours that had already been investing in esports for a number of years with ESL in this market, but also had traditional partnerships for a number of years with both the Canberra Raiders and St Kilda. Now, of course, while those traditional sports were on pause, we wanted to find a way of how can we still activate and engage the fan base of these partnerships whilst they couldn't, whilst we would traditionally be doing so. So what we created was a battle of the codes with Dare Ice Coffee on Twitch, where we brought these two rival codes together to battle it out in a fortnight squad. But importantly, we couldn't just rely on the traditional sports stars to bring an audience in. We also had to partner with two gamers, Loser Fruit and Fresh Asian, who would also bring a big, strong audience into this space. So for us, a lot of learnings in here, but definitely a way of bringing both the traditional and the new growth in sport around gaming together for the first time. So in summary, I suppose the things to think about is that I believe, I guess, the future of partnerships, we will always champion requiring deals to be set up that are bespoke. But importantly, as the AFL has spoken to, we need to make sure that there's now more of an important role for digital assets within your contracts to essentially enable you to reach and engage with the fans. And now I'll pass on to my namesake, also Patrick from Cricket Australia.
Hey Patrick, good morning everyone. So I'll go straight into our own experience with the sort of COVID crisis, if you like, from March. So when this kicked in, we were effectively at the end of our home season. So fan expectations, I guess, around live sport and plugging that gap, if you like, that other codes had to deal with wasn't as much of an issue for us. But on the flip side, not a traditionally strong time of year coming out of March, April, May. So a bit of a challenge for us to stay relevant and useful during this time. And I guess to Sarah's point as well, we were challenged a little bit with some limited team resources during this period as well. So if we can move on to the first slide, I think archive was the obvious go-to for us and is a strong point for us to work with. But rather than opening the floodgates and dumping a heap of content, we have our entire archive back to the late 70s is digitized, but rather than just dumping all that on various platforms, mainly through choice, but partly through necessity, I guess, we took a more curated approach. We created some appointment viewing, some as live replays on a Sunday to really recreate that feeling of what it was like to watch cricket back in the day. Multiple consumption options, so you could watch it, the full replay, last few overs, certain moments, focusing on players, etc. And then offering that broader context for why this was important and why this was particularly resonant for people, and then giving viewers the choice in terms of through polls of what they wanted to see, so giving them some agency around what they were looking at. We also had a top 20 and 20 countdown series, which again, not reinventing the wheel, lists tend to work and get people fired up, especially through an archive lens as well. But I think what it was able to do was really exercise multiple platforms across every channel and platform that we have, and also the breadth of our coverage and how agnostic our coverage is as well. It wasn't just a purely Australian player driven exercise, as anyone who saw the top 10 batting performances will know, and a really nice out of season alignment for 4X, one of our key partners as well, who are a really good match for our archive work. So that was a great success, along with keeping our players and coaches visible via Zoom calls, finding out how they were traveling with everything, and also reflecting on past glories as well, which again was able to generate archive content for us through podcast interviews and more video content that resulted. So what came out of that for us was, I guess, some really, really enormous social numbers driven globally, but with a higher percentage than we would expect in Australia as well. So it showed the appetite was there for this sort of comfort food, if you like, this sort of content, that nostalgia driven content that people were latching onto. And I guess from our point of view, it gave us a lot of valuable data in terms of what resonated and what platforms it resonated, what formats resonated, what players, what opposition. And again, just really informed the conversation around what we can do with the archive we have available to us, how we can leverage that and what that can look like going forward. And I guess the main takeout, which, not an enormous news flash, but it reinforced that the power of cricket nostalgia to bring that comfort and escape in a difficult time is quite powerful and can really power our year-round engagement plan, I guess, outside of that core season. So if you look at the next slide, around the impact of COVID and how it's expedited some of the work that was already in play for us. So we were entering something of a new phase in our digital evolution. So this has expedited our planning and execution in some areas, and I guess it's thrown into sharp relief and actually made it more relevant. Some of the work that was already being done as we sort of worked through some very uncertain times, starting with our commercial partnerships, where scale and reach still key for us and still a really enormous selling point for what we do. But I guess we were already developing a more layered approach to that, working with brands to develop their story arcs that can be mutually beneficial, widen the scope of what's possible, and redefine the value of those campaigns and what success can look like going forward. That will hopefully be partly informed by a data strategy that we're working on now as well, which I know a lot of sporting organizations are going through, I'm sure, as well, but harnessing what's available to us across our data pools and knowing our audience better in order to enhance how we can target them and give them information as they need it, which feels like it's going to be more and more crucial, particularly in the short term. And then using that data to power our personalization strategy and being able to recognize users regardless of their touch point. With cricket, we're not just an editorial channel. Our digital scope covers participation, enablers, a huge across all of our states and territories. So a really huge ecosystem that we want to be able to recognize those users, and regardless of what their touch point is to cricket, and provide them with the info they need and make their lives easier through difficult times as well as good. And then that emphasis on creating heroes and the player-driven content, that's always been pretty key for us for obvious reasons, but I guess evolving the athlete-driven brand that we have, Direct Hit, to widen the scope of that. That's focused on a small amount of elite players to date, but we're looking to really broaden that out across the entire playing community and really open up those storytelling opportunities to deepen those connections and context for fans. But also the test, as I think it was referenced already on this call, the Amazon documentary, the test was a huge hit during lockdown. So building on the personalities that were generated from that, and I guess celebrating the sort of quirkiness and the different big personalities we saw from that, particularly in the men's team. And we have a women's documentary coming as well, based around the World Cup. So again, building out on that and enhancing that connection that our fans feel towards those heroes that we see. So all of that has been, I guess, turbocharged a little bit by recent events and in recent months. If I move on to the next slide, which is around the specifics of the Melbourne lockdown, I don't mean to be flip with that headline. It's a very, very tough time for a lot of people and a pretty heartbreaking time. So I guess from our point of view of sitting back and looking at what we'd done well in the previous phase of this, if you like. So moving away from the purely editorial aspects of that and providing that comfort food and that escape, which we still will endeavor to do, but I guess acknowledging that people are doing it tough and really focusing more on using our digital channels to provide that sense of community and service and support from outside Victoria, around Australia and beyond, and really focusing on that two-way conversation and, making player connections manifest and actually reaching out to people in the cricket community who really need it and show that the rest of the cricketing world is thinking of them. So that's a bit of a work in progress, some great work being done there by Callum Cananyuk and our content team and beyond, and the results of that will be visible very soon. But I thought it was worth just calling out how, I guess, as we move into these different phases of this, how our thinking changes on what we can be and what we can provide to our fans and the cricket community more widely. And finally, looking at the, where we're at now, I guess, with social numbers still rolling strongly, but focus for us now is getting people back onto our platforms, back watching cricket, which is back, and it's great to have actual cricket to work with. We were able to carry the live streams of the recent England tests, which was a real boon for us and have rated really well. We've got the Pakistan test ongoing now. Unfortunately, we didn't have the Ireland-England ODIs, but I wasn't going to forego the opportunity to have the screen grab of us stunning England in Southampton the other night. But, with live cricket back on board and back on stream and having our content team back on board and firing, and I guess, as per that screen grab there, the diversity of content across not just focusing on, archive of men's cricket, opening it up to those other competitions, widening that audience and as we've been endeavouring to do. It's just really great to see us being able to get back into that mode and providing that range of cricketing content for whatever your touch point is and whatever your interest is across the wide range of products that we have. So we're looking forward to a home season that's clearly not going to be like any other we've ever seen. I guess we have the advantage from a timing perspective of sort of looking at what is happening elsewhere and how people are approaching it from that fan engagement perspective. We're going to be a primary touch point for how fans are engaged and how they're going to be made feel close to the action. So that's clearly another work in progress, but you know, we have India coming, fingers crossed, the 10th edition of the BBL, another standalone WBBL season. So again, so many different ways to engage different audiences, which we'll be looking to maximize across our digital channels. And yeah, summer is coming, which is good news. And for everyone, and without wanting to be too Melbourne centric, it's where I am right now, but I guess sport is about hope, and that's a bit of a statement of hope right now. So we hope that we can play a really key role in leading that return to normality and routine that people are really yearning for, and basically making what an Australian summer what it should be, and powered by the help and support of our partners. We hope that we can play a really leading role in that. So that's it for me. I'll hand back to Guy.
Fantastic, lovely to end on that positive note. I might get everyone to come turn their cameras on if possible, and we'll have a bit of a chat, including me. Thank you for all that information. I'm just still processing. There's so much stuff there. We've got some great questions coming through from the audience, so we might start with a couple of them. One of them that came through from Sarah, which is close to one of the ones I was interested in as well. Now that you've expanded your audience and you're in the process of expanding your audience, I guess, are they looking for different content? How do you deal with segmentation? And it almost overlaps a little bit with what Patrick was just saying there. So they're heading towards personalization. You know, how do you tailor that content?
Yeah, there's it's quite fascinating. Like 40% of fans of the AFL are female. Yet from a media perspective, women aren't really catered for from a sports perspective. So you've seen some really good, I guess, new content coming through from different content creators. The Outer Sanctum is a great podcast, Talking Footy by 6 women, that's hosted on the ABC. There's some really good content. I definitely think there's an opportunity to talk to more female fans specifically. But from our side of things, there's a few things that we've done. So one, we've become much more insights and data driven, as opposed to, you know, football fans being part of a content team, making content that they just want to watch or read themselves, which is kind of what we had a couple of years ago. So the insights has been a really big piece of it. The diversity of workforce thing, I think, has been the biggest driver, though, to be really honest, because it's, you know, we're making content now that I would want to watch, and I'm not a football fan. You know, so it's you need different people, you need different thinking. You can't really underestimate the importance of that. We've hired a whole bunch of different people. We have Indigenous staff talking about Indigenous and social issues, using AFL as a platform, which is hugely important. You've got people who've had different experiences and diversity of thought on a whole bunch of different levels. So that the workforce piece is huge for us. There's also a point around that question around tone, and that's a massive part that I think gets overlooked. You know, there's a lot of hardcore female football fans who just don't resonate with the way that football content is created. It doesn't mean they're not interested in the analysis of a game. It just means that the way that we're writing the analysis or that we're portraying the analysis isn't wholly relevant to them. And so we're working a lot. I think we're still, to be really honest with you, have a long way to go there. That's a big I think opportunity for us still. But I just don't. I think that we kind of just, you know, expect that analysis of content will hit all audiences. It's kind of similar for younger demographics. If you think about sporting news, it still caters, I think, for an older male audience. It's not really sporting news for younger fans. So it's definitely a combination of all of those things. But trial and error, I think, is something that we're trying to do a lot more of.
And have the sponsors come along on that journey with you?
To be honest with you, it's the bit that is the most exciting for commercial partners.
Yeah.
I'm sort of sick of talking to our blokes, to be honest. They kind of want something different and something that's a bit more. You know, in my 20 years of working in media, not one time did I ever have a brief that said I want news. No one ever said that to me. No one ever wants news, but they want more. They want content that is unique, exclusive in some way, that is great storytelling, that features great talent, that provides you a different angle, something that's, you know, differentiated. And I think that focus is really what we're calling that, and we're not calling it sportstainment, just for the record. It was sort of a joke. That's kind of what
Sorry
we're trying.
about that.
Oh, I'm glad you identified it as a joke. Otherwise, that would be a little bit awkward. So it's that entertainment piece that brands are loving. It's that broader, more brand-friendly conversations that you can have with different audiences. And the AFL is just a platform to talk to lots of people. It doesn't have to be about sport. You know, it can be about health, wellness, families, connection. It doesn't have to be about the actual physical game itself.
Scott, the main part of your job really in your sports role is looking at sports sponsorship. In this new world, both going to digital and with sort of a broader range of content and I guess quite different metrics coming off the back of it. How are you guys looking at sports sponsorship?
Yeah. So we did a survey recently, a sponsorship outlook report, where we basically survey the key stakeholders in the industry. So everyone from rights holders to brand owners to TV networks to digital publishers and so forth. And couple of sort of key themes emerged. Still the number one piece is really around that ROI and being able to have some kind of consistent framework to measure that sort of return on investment, sort of came through in the research. And I think what was indicated, just given the new environment and just the pressures on marketing budgets, is there's even more scrutiny now coming through for sports sponsorship. The other piece that also came up, which is interesting in terms of across, say, 20 or so criteria in terms of what's important from a sponsorship proposal perspective. And there was actually consensus on this one criteria across both rights holders and also brands. And that was the number one thing that they're all looking for is digital and social integration opportunities. That was basically came through at the top of the list.
Yeah, great, thanks. That might be a good one to lead into Gus. Angus, obviously that's music to your ears to hear about the social integration side of things. One thing I'm interested in, there's been a big trend globally on niche sports becoming, getting new opportunities, either through sort of narrowcast TV networks in the States. Do you see that coming through from a sports community point of view? So beyond the big codes that we've talked about today, bubbles of smaller sports?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we touched on it a bit today, and I think they're not really classified as niche sports. I mean, I guess we're still just debating that, aren't we? And the big ones, esports, that's become absolutely massive on Twitter, both here and I think we had 100 million unique authors just in APAC around esports in 1 month. So that just shows just how phenomenal that is. We're working with, all of the sort of local publishers in that space, as well as all the global publishers. The other one I would say is again, it's, we're moving, I think, away from it being a niche sport. It's obviously women's sports, and just the phenomenal amount of conversation and interest in women's sports on Twitter. And we, as part of that research, which I just shared, I think one of the biggest stats that sort of sung to me was 84% of people were following a women's sports league on Twitter in Australia. And I think that just shows, if you think about, we don't have stats from where that was a couple of years ago, because we didn't do that research, but I would assume that is a massive increase. And they're wanting more women's sports on the platform. And then we had like the Matildas announcement around the Women's World Cup. So yeah, just I'd say those two. And then, and then outside of the big leagues, the NRL, the AFL, we're certainly doing some interesting things with the NBL. That's another one who's really leaned in and doing different things around how do they broadcast their content on different platforms outside of, your traditional linear TV.
Great, thanks. Patty H. I don't know if I'm jealous or terrified of your job. So if I think about the journey you guys are going on at the moment, it's probably where the AFL were a couple of years ago, really, in terms of digital content and building out your team. You've talked a little bit about your priorities today. The personalisation thing's quite interesting, and the data piece as we go into a world of first-party data being more and more valuable. I'll let you answer this. What are you most excited about out of the, I guess, rebuild?
Yeah, I guess that the data piece is a long running bugbear of many organizations, as I said, and especially when you have the volume that we have available to us to harness. So really being able to pull that together and address audiences, and again, be truly fan first in that sense of really recognizing where they are in the ecosystem, and it's not about necessarily selling into them, but although that's clearly valuable and useful, but I think it's just being able to provide them with the best possible user experience, obviously. So that's a really exciting project, and sort of pulling that in across all of the platforms and products we have, and that's a pretty challenging project. But I guess the balancing that with having those various channels to reach those different audiences with different tones of voice, and being driven by what the players have done with the women's game, and the amount of personalities that we've been able to surface and that are able to drive the sort of content and the sort of tone of voice we have through those social channels has been fantastic. So I guess and we're also looking at sort of harnessing the skills from around the business, not just from within the digital team. So we're aligning a lot more closely with our colleagues in the broader fan engagement team, with commercial, with states and territories as well. So to maximize the impact across the board. I mean, if you look at our platforms today, the ASICS launch of the female specific cricket shoes, if anybody has seen that, for the female. So it's the first time there's been a specific designed cricket shoes for female cricketers. That's a great example of that in action across our content offering, across our commercial team, and that all touch point element there that you can see on our platforms now. So I guess that's a good manifestation of how we're looking at approaching those sort of projects from here. But I guess looking further ahead, you're just trying to set yourself up to be more data driven, to build your in-house capability in some very uncertain times, and position ourselves and be nimble enough in an ever-changing landscape to be able to leverage whatever opportunities might arise. I mean, it's a pretty confronting time, and we hope we can weather it and come out the other side. But I guess just being in as healthy a position as you can be to weather that and do as much for yourself as you can.
Thank you. And look, the last question I will do is I awkwardly do my screen share again. As you've all noticed, my screen and my PowerPoint turning skills aren't the greatest. And it's one for Patty W, and maybe, I don't know if Sarah's got anything to add as well, but our next webinar is on esports. So question on the Dare Ice Coffee Fortnite piece, and I guess where that audience is coming from, where it's being driven from traditional gaming sort of identities, AFL fans, sort of that, how it's sort of coming together, I guess.
Yeah, look, I guess as I said previously, we're finding that the scale of traditional sports stars doesn't always translate into a digital ecosystem. A prime example of that was I was watching something out of the UK recently, which was Soccer Aid, which had in the final Usain Bolt versus Robbie Williams, and there were 900 people watching it. And you'd expect on TV that would be quite a big piece of content that people would want to watch. So for us, specifically around Dare, we would first look at what type of followers the players themselves have, but you can't always assume that followers want to follow them into a gaming environment. Plus also where we were hosting the Dare Ice Coffee Battle of the Codes was on Twitch. So that was a new channel, not only for some Dare Ice Coffee drinkers, but also for the sports stars as well. So absolutely, you are reliant on a number of digital esports stars that have an audience that would bring that. So for us, yes, it required 2 local Australian gamers in Loser Fruit and Fresh Asian, who have quite a large scale of following on Twitch, to play and host those games on their channels and drive from there. So absolutely, that is perhaps a way to immediately scale as you build your audience and as you move more into this space with your traditional sports. You absolutely are reliant on those that have been there and are continue growing their audience and specializing.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. I know we're a couple of minutes over time. Thanks to all the speakers today and sharing your time and knowledge and wisdom. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. Everyone who's registered will get an email early next week with a link to the recording and the presentations. And please get in contact if you've got any other questions that haven't come through the Q&A, and we'll hopefully get them answered for you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.